let's expand this conversation around trade. Still, concerns around a U.S.-led trade war dominating discussions here at the BRICS Summit. I've got David Monyae, co-director of at the Confucius Institute here in Johannesburg, joining me now. Thank you very much for your time. David, you know, there is this, the U.S. has struck a deal with the EU on eliminating all tariffs on non-auto goods. I mean, this is good news for trade, right, for global trade. The concern, though, is that it does feel like a serious stab at China.
It looks like the main target is China. And this, what it does is that it really brings in a fragmented global system. I think we have a rule-based system through the WTO, and those rules need to be respected. And the manner in which the U.S. is going about dealing with this particular issue poses a great danger, not just to China, but to the rest of the world and the global economy. It is coming at a time when the economies are trying to recover, and with this, I think it's going to worsen the situation.
Let's expand on that. China's partners, Africa, as you know, is huge. I mean, you know, the impact of this. What are we likely to see in the coming months? Because it does look like this is not going away anytime soon.
It is going to affect us quite greatly. Already, Minister Davis has made it quite clear that the threat to our economy, even though we might not be the target, but we are heavily affected by it, which to means some of our goods, the price might go up, and there's going to be disruptions in terms of the lack of certainty in terms of trade. It's something that needs to be eliminated, and it's unfortunate that the U.S. continues to use this as a negotiating tool. And obviously, China will have its own countermeasures in dealing with. The bigger question for all of us is, when will all this madness stop? And if it doesn't stop, it's going to affect South Africa, is going to affect the continent and the rest of the developing world.
So even if you have the countermeasures, the tit for tat is just really not good for global trade for any of the countries, and especially for emerging markets. But, you know, looking at this BRICS Summit, one would say that the timing is really good, because here you have a really powerful grouping. You could use this opportunity to actually improve or really become the world force, or the force that you want against the Western world. Would that be the case? You know, are the BRICS leaders speaking with one voice? Will there be a consensus that they will fight this together?
They're all affected. And other than China, the rest of BRIC countries, their economies are not doing well. And therefore, I think you'll see a united voice around key issues. I think one of it is anti-protectionism, as well as to have a sense of certainty on the market. I think it affects the emerging powers, and they have no choice. For those who thought that BRICS will die, I mean, a natural death, I think what's happening with this war or threats of war, I mean, trade wars, what is going to is giving more relevance to the need for BRICS to speak on behalf of the developing world and ensure that whatever that they agree on this summit, it will filter through to other important multilaterals at United Nations, within the WTO, and I think you're going to see more and more of emerging powers far beyond BRICS, such as Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia, Argentina, even Mexico, the neighbor of US, more aligning closer to BRICS than to developed countries and the US in particular.
Because you've got Russia in this grouping. Russia has also been on the wrong side of the US, if you want to call it that. There's still sanctions, US sanctions on Russia. You know, going forward, I mean, what is Russia hoping to get out of this summit, and in terms of their partnerships with the rest of the other countries that are attending?
I think Russia is driven by its own national interest. It has to increase its trade. It also has to develop strategic partnership with key countries, and of which BRICS countries, all of them are of strategic importance to Russia in terms of its trading, goods. For instance, Russia, South Africa. South Africa is Russia's #1 trading partner on the African continent. And there are quite a number of other areas where Russia is doing quite well. And we have so much in common. We are both raw material producers, and I think there is so much that South Africa, Russia could agree on in terms of bringing stability within the commodity.
There does feel like a lot more needs to be done. And especially when when you're looking at Brazil and Russia, we're hearing mostly on BRICS, we're hearing about India and China as the heavyweights here. What are the agendas of Russia and of Brazil, for instance?
Quite limited. It's also worrying. Something that was mentioned by South Africa's Minister of Trade and Industry, Rob Davis, who made it quite clear that South Africa has invested more than $60 billion into BRICS countries, and it only received 18 billion. So I think we expect, from a South African perspective, we expect more investment, such as the one we're seeing coming from China, massive investment into South Africa and the African continent. We're expecting more from Brazil, given the fact that it has a long history and relationship with the African continent. I think they should find other areas, and therefore, while we're looking at the talk of trade wars as a threat, we should also see opportunities. A classical example is among the deals signed between South Africa and China, is that China will rely less on the United States on beef. So it might import more from South Africa. So those are kind of issues. Where do we close the gap? Where are advantages so that we don't look only at threats emanating from Washington? I think the world needs to start uniting and have a common position to counter views as well as positions that are put by the United States that are not for peace and security in the world.
I want to pick up on China's investment in Africa. It's been really steady. It's been growing over the years. And at some of the discussions here at the summit, you're hearing a lot of countries talking about China giving them at least a voice, but they're feeling like, there's no defined strategy around where Africa is going to fit into BRICS. What is the African participation, and how much room do African countries have to maneuver under this partnership? And
first and foremost, we have to also understand that BRICS is an agreement between these 5 countries. However, there is an understanding among these 5 countries that they are not just speaking for themselves. Somehow, there is a broad representation of regions. South Africa in Africa, and therefore I think South Africa also need to take a cue from the AU, ensure that the voice of Africa, and you see with this 10th summit, BRICS Summit, more African countries were invited. I think that speaks volume in terms of how the spirit of going back to 1955 of developing countries to unite, to ensure there's more trade and collaboration and bring peace and security to the world goes ahead without the exclusion that they're facing in their interaction with the developed world.
There is the concern, though, that yes, we want this inclusion, we want to be there, but we can't necessarily compete with some of these heavyweights.
We have to change the structure of our economies. We're producing similar commodities and raw material without beneficiation. I think there's much more coordination that is required from Africa itself to ensure that out of all these African countries, who produces what, and have a common position, and ensure that there's a common African market comes into effect quite quickly, because all the destabilization that are taking place at the global stage has a huge impact, and Africa can only survive and thrive if it is united and ensure that it closes its market and trade from a position of trade, of an advantage in terms of population, 1.1 billion. So if we could negotiate better.
It's still a really big market. I wish I could spend more time chatting to you. David, thank you very much for your time. David Monyae, co-director at the Confucius Institute.